us and members. It is also the opportunity with our speakers today. It's given us the opportunity to extend the invitations to those members across our wider Business West area, so into Gloucestershire, Wiltshire, Swindon, and also with colleagues and partners from across the wider Chamber network across the South West, Somerset, Devon, Dorset and Cornwall are all with us today. So welcome to everybody. As Libby said, this is one of our regular Business West Initiative meetings, and we're really delighted today to welcome three guests. We have Katherine Bennett, Vice President of Airbus UK and Chair of the Western Gateway Partnership. We have Baroness Ruby McGregor Smith, who's recently become the President of the British Chambers of Commerce, and Director General Adam Marshall. And I'll say a little bit more about the three of them as the morning unfolds. I think in these ongoing challenging times, we recognise that it's really important that we remain connected. One of the reasons why we're having more regular initiative meetings at the moment. We need to create an environment for collaboration, and this is vital that we continue to join the dots at both the local, regional and national level, working with businesses and government and stakeholders across those three areas to make sure that we get the very best possible chance for us to thrive, flourish and recover from this pandemic. And we'll hear a little bit more about some of the work that's going on as the morning unfolds. For our part, we continue to engage through multiple channels, and in particular our Trading Through Coronavirus platform continues to form an important way in which members and businesses in the region can engage with us and share with us their challenges, and we can use those to both make a difference through our lobbying and the work that we do through our partner support. It's also important that we continue to engage in the many different channels where we can help to influence and bring the voice of business to those conversations. The work that James Dury is doing with the City Office, in particular the Economy Board, and the work that myself, Phil Smith, and other board members of the Chamber and the Initiative are engaged with the West of England Combined Authority Economic Task Force. And I think it's really important to say that as we move to the next stage, we have to continue to work together to use our assets to support the recovery in all aspects of our economy. We know for some of those it continues to be a real challenge. And I think more widely, we have to ensure that our economic recovery is linked to equality and fairness for many communities who continue to remain disadvantaged. And also we have to do a lot of work to really help to create the environment for citizens to feel confident that they can get out, that they can use public transport, that they can come into our towns and cities in due course, and that they continue to feel safe to do so. And we all have a part to play in that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to James, who's just going to give us a brief update with members of the team on what we've been doing more recently. So James, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and very good morning to everybody. Great to see so many people on our meeting today. As Richard said, this is now in our 10th week with our fortnightly meetings, and this is it's proved a really, I'm pleased to say, a very successful way of engaging with you on a more regular basis at a time when we are all being tested in lots of different ways, our businesses, and for some of us individually around, on the issues that COVID has done, particularly around related to the lockdown. I want to just give a few opening words, and we've got one or two slides. I wanted to bring in briefly Victoria Matthews and Nina Skabala from my team to talk a little bit specifically about some of the work we've been doing, but just not time for lots of detailed reflections, of course, now. But I think the challenge continues for us. I think that in some ways the rhythm, the pace of certainly of my work has changed in the last 10 weeks. And even though perhaps some of the heat of the changes are behind us, there's still some big challenges ahead. But also I sense, by nature, and I think we as an organisation are positive, there is a sense I think we turned a little bit of a corner, and that things are starting to look ahead to see as kind of the lid comes off in terms of people being able to start to move around and operate, how we start to enable and equip business and give them the confidence first and foremost to get back to operating. So I'm delighted that we've got a chance to talk at both at a national but also regional and a local level today, because that's the basis upon which we as Business West and the Chambers of Commerce, myself as the Chief Exec of Bristol Chamber, but also as the Exec Director for Business West, we have to look at these different levels and operate in that environment. I think I've got the slide up there. Hopefully people can see the slide. Richard, you able to see the slide okay? Just checking.
Yeah, carry on, James.
So yeah, we continue to support businesses by the nature about how we operate. We want and we need to work with public and private partners, some of the other business groups, in order to enact and how we help to support directly businesses, particularly smaller and medium-sized companies, but any companies and employers of any size, and in what they're doing. And I think part of what we've been doing over recent weeks has been around the first responder stuff, working at elevating issues up to a national level, listening to Adam and his colleagues and working in lots of detail with them, but at the regional level, working with a range of these partners here, public and private, and a kind of real-time basis. And I think if I reflect in Bristol particularly, with the one city approach, we've been having times daily calls, but it's sort of slightly slowed down there, talking with some of the resilience forums with public partners, and for us representing the private sector chunk of that, and what we want, what we need. And I've seen amazing examples, I have to say, of businesses and others helping one another through this. And I think we've sought to try and, I think, create that environment that Richard talked about to enable more businesses to, where they can and they want to try and support others and other organisations. So if we could move to the next slide, please, Libby. Just takes a second to load. So we have, as part of the work we've done by pivoting a dozen people 10 weeks ago into what we described as trading through coronavirus, we've helped businesses to access some of the government support, the furlough schemes, the loan schemes, and understand that, interpret that. Some of our members have been fantastic in helping us to do that, writing some of the sort of support and guidance which goes with it. But also we have been identifying some of the gaps and working with the Combined Authority, with the councils in the West of England, and also with British Chambers, Enterprise Nation, TechSpark, actually to forensically go do some lobbying work led by our policy team to get some relaxation about some of the monies that government have allocated but aren't in the hands of all the businesses we know that need that support. So we've had some success, I'm pleased to say, with getting some of that relaxation so we can get I say some of that cash into the hands of what we've identified as at least 400 businesses across the West of England who sit within managed workspace, who can't access that cash but do need it in order to stabilise their businesses for now, in order for that they're there into the future. So that's just one example about some of the strategic lobbying we've done, and we've had some success, to say, working with others. If we could move to the next slide, please, Libby. So I'm going to hand across to Victoria, who's going to talk a little bit more specifically about one or two of the things we've been doing, and then across then to Nina Skabala to talk more about recovery.
Good morning all, thank you James. I'm just going to quickly whiz through some of the practical things that we've been doing to support businesses. So as many of you know, we're providing impartial free guidance for businesses across the Southwest during the pandemic. And as your local Chambers of Commerce, it's our role to ensure that we're trying to provide clarity and work out what the government guidance means for your business on the ground. So we have an expert policy team that's answered over 400 questions so far, some of them very, very detailed, so they've been fantastic at that. And essentially our Trading Through Coronavirus platform was launched to help any business, regardless of size or capacity, trade through the virus pandemic. So we have expert advice on furloughing, employment law, FAQs, and we also have a whole host of various support available completely free of charge. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please, Libby. We've also launched our video and podcast series. So we have over 30 videos so far. And on there, you can just see a bit of a flavour of some of the topics we've got. So gender equality, PPE shortages, looking at the visitor economy post-COVID, support for charities, a whole host of different support for your businesses. So we are aiming to provide clarity and support for those businesses that are struggling. So if anybody continues to have any ideas on content or something they feel that could really benefit the business community, please do get in touch. Next slide, if that's all right, Libby. And finally, we've also kicked off our webinar series, which is great. So we've had 2 so far from VWV and Womble Dickinson, all about contracts and how to get back to work safely. We've got 4 more coming up, as you can see on the screen. Again, the call is out there. If there are members who have content, then we're really, really keen to get in touch with you. We really want to hear from those members that feel they could support the business community moving forward. So that about wraps it up from me. I'm going to pass over to my colleague Nina, who's going to be talking through some of the recovery work. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. We did a recent survey of our members, which demonstrated that only 16% of them believe that they would be able to survive after a prolonged lockdown period. And this has been echoed time and time again by various studies, like the ones by the Bank of England and the PMI index. So we're acutely aware of how brave the economic future could be for this region. So moving beyond that, having that sort of first responder to the crisis, as placemakers, we've been meeting weekly and regularly with our local authorities, combined authorities, LEPs, and other economic groups to look ahead at the economic recovery. And we've been using our network, many of which you are on this call today, to make sure that we are engaging a whole host of different sectors, business leaders and business groups across the city to make sure that they have an opportunity to sort of input into that recovery process. What's clear is from the work that we've been doing across the patch is that businesses and business leaders want the recovery we want to emerge stronger, and particularly in Bristol we've been looking at using the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but it's echoed across the different groups that the growth or the recovery needs to be inclusive, and many are talking about looking at the climate emergency as well, and having a net zero approach to the growth. So all in all, we're looking at, by working across the whole region, we're looking to make sure that the approach is joined up. We want to make sure that there are plenty of shovel-ready projects, that we know what government is wanting or what government has available for recovery, and that we are all putting a clear and concise viewpoints across to make sure that we can get the best recovery for this region. And one that also reflects the uniqueness of the cities, the vibrant cities and towns that we have across the West Country. Thank you.
Nina, James and Victoria, thank you very much for that update and introduction. And not clearly a lot of work going on and a lot of member engagement through our various different channels, which is really good to see. So I'd now like to introduce Katherine Bennett, who is the Vice President of Airbus UK. Of course, we know Airbus is one of our major employers in our city region, and we're delighted to have Katherine here. Katherine is also the chair of the recently formed Western Gateway Partnership, an economic area that cuts from Swindon right through our area into Wales. So Katherine, without further ado, if I could ask you to provide us with an update, both in terms of Airbus and Western Gateway Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, James, for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm rather overawed that there are over 160 people joining this, so it really does demonstrate the power that Business West has and its key membership. So if Libby, you're happy to press the button on my slides, that would be wonderful. First slide then to show you is a little bit of a summary, and I know a lot of you know what Airbus does and is, but just a quick summary that we're not just commercial aerospace, we're also very important provider of space, satellite design and technology, and of course defence transportation. We're the largest provider of large aircraft to the RAF. And all importantly, we also have a helicopter business here in the UK. They're based in Oxford, and they provide a lot of the helicopters for the what we call the blue light, the emergency services, and also quite a lot of civil helicopter provision as well. You'll see the stats there on the slide about the number of employees we have and £6 billion worth of revenue, 25 sites across the UK. Next slide, please. So these good old infographics, which I'm sure you're all used to seeing, but some of the key points that we like to talk about in terms of our impact in the UK. Estimate we're responsible for 110,000 jobs in the supply chain. UK is part of a very big Airbus network. We have this thing we call the 4 home countries: France, Germany, Spain and UK. We're a big investor in R&D in the UK. And I'm very proud that a lot of that takes place down here in the west of England. Our Filton site specialises in wing design, in integration of landing gear and in fuel systems testing. And we also have a production facility for the A400M wing, which is the military transporter used by the RAF. Next slide, please. So, of course, we're right in this storm of the coronavirus impact, and the aviation industry has been hugely impacted. And this is a photo of a load of aircraft that are just being stored with their engines covered up. So 90%, that's 90% of aircraft are grounded at the moment. I'm very pleased to say I heard just this morning that China's airline industry is back up to 80% of where it was before the crisis started, and it will be an emerging pattern, but clearly devastating impact on our industry. We, in terms of the aircraft manufacturers, are sort of somewhat down the line compared to our partners, the airlines and airports, but perhaps that's the key point I wanted to say to you today, that the impact is going to be very long-term on our industry. And all importantly, aerospace is a huge part of the economy, as Richard said, for this region. So we are keen to get support from all our partners, such as you I'm speaking to you today. Next slide, please, Libby. So in terms of what Airbus has done on response to this virus, clearly we're working closely with our airline customers. A lot of them are not able to accept deliveries of the orders they've made, so we're working with them on maybe moving deliveries over to the right. We've taken, as have many other companies here in the UK, several measures: social, financial and operational. On the social side, we asked our employees to take their holidays early. We've only just started using the furlough scheme. We endeavour to use our own measures before using the government scheme. And we have sadly had to reduce a number of our subcontractors who work for us on site. The big news we had a few weeks ago was that we've reduced the rate of our aircraft production. On our single aisle aircraft, which I call the EasyJet size aircraft, it's now down to 40 a month, which is obviously going to have a big impact on not only our production, but also on our suppliers. In terms of financial, cash is the key thing for us. Yes, we're a big company, but we very much depend on those all-important aircraft deliveries. And we've taken various measures. We've been in discussions with the Bank of England on some financial support there, and working with other parts of government on things such as UK export finance. Some of you may also be aware, in terms of our contribution we want to make to the nation and the response to this virus. I'm very proud that we've been part of a consortium working to build ventilators for the NHS, an amazing project run by one of our catapult centres. Not only us, but also Renishaws and GKN, Meggitt, and a number of other companies based in our area have been involved in that. And the production is actually taking place up in our factory in North Wales. We've also endeavoured, as many other companies have, to contribute to the PPE support on that. So we've been bringing in a whole load of PPE over from China, brought flights in and delivered those to the NHS. So quite a lot of activity there. The key thing for me going forward in terms of aerospace is working together with the government on industrial strategy. And the supply chain watchtower process has been started. and we're in discussion with the government on that. And I know many other colleagues of mine in aerospace in this area have been working on that and looking at research and technology. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, the big thing for us is encouraging people to return to flight. Of course, at the moment in the UK, Foreign Office advice is that people should not be travelling. So we're working as part of an end-to-end experience with our partners in aviation to ensure that people understand that actually flying in an aircraft cabin can be done very safely. We've been working with the regulators all across Europe on that, and our airport partners, etc. And we do hope that that can happen as soon as possible. We do know that a lot of airlines are already now taking bookings from sort of July onwards, and we are keen that that we can see that restored. But let's, we before the crisis started, the environment, we were working towards COP26 in Glasgow. We absolutely appreciate that we have a part to play in this climate change emergency, and we are very committed. Our CEO has actually categorically said that we continue to work on sustainable fuels, reducing noise impacts, and our R&T engineers based in Filton are working hard on that. Down the road, of course, Brexit continues to be a challenge for us, and I know Business West has done a lot of work on this, and as has many other partners. We are continue to be concerned about the impact of Brexit, but working hard with the government on that. So that's Airbus. So now the slides are going to change colour to a different colour, which is to talk, as Richard asked me to, about the Western Gateway. As you can see on the slide here, it's talking about a powerhouse waiting to happen. So I was very proud to be asked to chair this. Next slide, please, Libby. You'll see on here, I've just put a bit of a summary about the history of the powerhouse. It goes back to many, many years in many ways. And really, I'm a sort of Johnny-come-lately because, of course, there's a huge amount of work being done already by many of our leadership, political leadership in the area, talking across the River Severn to South Wales and wider in the West Country about how can we ensure that we have a strength in numbers and work together to promote our area as a place to invest and also as a place to live and work. A lot of it, the catalyst was when the Severn Bridge tolls came down, and a report was written, commissioned by the big cities in the area with Metro Dynamics, and that was published in the House of Lords last July. Next slide, please. Key facts and figures, again, another one of those infographics, you just can't get enough of them. You'll see here about the kind of stats that we've pulled together in terms of the power and the strength of our region. We've got 8 large important cities, city regions, obviously beautiful villages and countryside and important towns. We have, of course, some very strong LEPs in existence. We have the Combined Authority in the west of England, and some major transport providers, of course, the airports in Cardiff and Bristol, and the ports in Cardiff and Bristol, and of course major motorways, and very importantly the universities, 11 universities, top world-class universities. Next slide, please. So back in November, the government launched the Western Gateway by the Secretary of State for Wales and the Secretary of State for MHCLG. That was literally just before the general election, so we had this launch, and of course things had to go slightly quiet on the political side because of the general election. But what I did was endeavour to get around and talk to as many parts of the area as I could and ensure that they knew who I was and what we were endeavouring to do with kickstarting this powerhouse. Next slide, please. So this slide really I pulled together just to demonstrate, how many times Western Gateway has been talked about, because I'd imagine if you walk down your street in your neighbourhood and you mention the Western Gateway to them, the average person wouldn't really know what they are. We're really just very much in our nascent phase, in our infancy. but it was part of the Conservative general election manifesto. We were mentioned in the Queen's speech, and very, very importantly, in the budget, there was some particular funding allocated. Now, a lot of that is part of work with the Department of International Trade. A lot of it was on transport. And if MIPIM had been going ahead, the all-important MIPIM event, we were going to be there, but of course, very much in our early stages. Next slide, please. So what's happened so far? Well, I'm not just putting these figures together to show off, but I've been endeavouring to have as many meetings as I can. I know obviously this side of the River Severn pretty well. I myself live in North Wiltshire, and of course I've lived and worked here for 16 years now, but some of the areas of South Wales I didn't know quite so well, so I've had some meetings there. Myself and other political leaders, such as the Mayor of Bristol, the Mayor of the West of England, other political leaders from the other councils in our area, we've had meetings with ministers, and I've kept very close contact with officials. I've also reached out to other powerhouses, so the Midlands Engine and the Northern Powerhouse, which of course have a little bit more time ahead of them, and I've been learning from them. Just to say, we're getting going. We're just publishing a governance review on how we should be set up. I've appointed South Gloucestershire District Council as the accounting body, and we're pulling together the secretariat. And what I've done is I've asked different parts of the partnership to lead on particular topics. For example, WECA and Cardiff City region are working together on international, working alongside Business West, I hope, and International Trade Department. Gloucestershire First LEP are looking at innovation, working with the universities. And there's many other areas that we've talked about allocating sort of subject matter leads. Next one, please. So back in February, we launched our prospectus, which I have a copy of here. We published that in February, and we were ready to sort of keep going on this agenda. And of course, then we had the COVID problem, but I'm very proud to say that the leadership, whilst some of them are running huge councils and huge issues on their plates, have really continued to engage with me and wanted to keep the agenda going. So I'm very proud of that, and I want to thank the political leaders, some of whom I think are on the call now, for the support they've given me personally. Next slide, please. So what are we focusing on? As you remember from the infographic I shared, we do believe we've got a lot of great things going for us. I have a very passionate belief as a business leader that business often follows business, and I'm so keen to get a load of business ambassadors to be alongside me. I've had lots of discussions with some businesses already, and James and I have talked about this a lot, about how we can engage people like yourselves in this project. We're focusing on 3 key ambitions: connectivity, as you can see there, global gateway. We've got great strengths in our export and inward investment, but actually there's so many more we can do. And of course, all importantly, innovation. Obviously, I know a lot about my sector, the advanced manufacturing, but of course, digital, high tech, green energy, all good projects for us. Next slide, please. So what's happening next? Well, part of the government funding that was allocated to us is to help pull together an independent economic review. Now, we're not going to start from scratch. We know there's so much work already being done by many of the partners already in our area, and we are going to sort of analyse all the work that's been done and pull together a really strong economic case. I'm planning to implement the governance review, which was undertaken in an excellent way for us by Deloitte locally. I had a meeting on that with our leadership yesterday, and we've got the go-ahead to start setting up our board. We're looking at asking for some business leaders to join the partnership board and also set up a business advisory group. And I'd be delighted, absolutely delighted, to work with the Chambers of Commerce on that. Some reference was made earlier about working with MPs. And I know this is a key thing that we need to get right. And we're looking at setting up an all-party group for the Western Gateway. I've already had some conversations with MPs about that. And of course, mustn't forget the Welsh Assembly members as well. And work along with all the other work that's already being done with many partners on the economic recovery. One very important point to make, and I referred earlier to Airbus and being a very long-term industry. the leader of Wiltshire Council said on one of our leaders' calls recently, you have to remember the impact that happened on the city of Salisbury when they had that dreadful issue, and it took a long time for businesses to revive there. And let's not fool ourselves that this is not going to be an easy task, and it's not going to happen overnight. But the only way that we can do that, I feel, is to use the amplification of having a leadership group that we've assembled, having businesses alongside us, and endeavour to ensure that this area that we are all proud and very happy to live in and work in can contribute to the nation's wealth. And if you don't mind me using the word levelling up, absolutely key messages I've had from government ministers recently is the importance they place in these subnational partnerships. And I look forward to continuing that journey with all of you. Thank you very much.
Katherine, thank you very much. That was a really insightful overview, both in terms of Airbus and the sort of impacts that you're seeing as an industry, but also, of course, with the work that you're doing to bring Western Gateway together. And we look forward to working with you and hearing more about both of those fronts as time unfolds. So thank you. I'm going to move on, and it's with real pleasure that we're delighted to welcome Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, who is the recently appointed National President of the British Chambers of Commerce. Ruby is currently a non-exec director at the Department for Education and Tideway, a senior independent advisor at Mace Group, and chair of the Airport Operators Association. And we might explore that a little bit further, I think, with some of the guests today, Ruby. You were recently, in 2011, appointed as CBE for Services to Business and Diversity in Business, and we welcome that in our city region. You became a life peer in 2015. So, Ruby, thank you very much for joining us, and this is your first opportunity to engage with us in the West of England and with colleagues more widely across the South West Chamber network. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here on my first, I guess, big virtual meeting that I've had since becoming president, which happened in March. But lots happened since the day I became president as well. Firstly, I'd like to say it's a huge honour to be president of the British Chamber of Commerce. You know, I've watched and worked with some of the chambers over the years, particularly when I was chief executive of Mighty, and it's fabulous to be here. And for those of you who may know me, clearly the South West is very much in my heart, because I worked in the South West for so many years with Mighty and got to know the region incredibly well. So, and really I thought today I'll just give you some of my sort of initial views. Firstly, I think the Chamber network is a really unique network when I take a look across the country. And it's fantastic just to look at all the organisations that come together to really represent, I guess, so many businesses and their views so much on the ground of what they see, which is often quite different to what I would say Whitehall and Westminster see. And it's fantastic that, you know, the government can actually get our feedback on what is really happening, particularly with the challenge, I think, of COVID-19. Now, you'll probably be aware, many of you, that I wrote to the Prime Minister at the beginning of May around what comes next, really, because this health crisis has caused such a shock to the economy. And as we look to move forward, I talked very much to the Prime Minister about the journey of recovery having three key phases: the restart phase, then the rebuild phase, and then the renew phase. And clearly we're still on restart because we've got a phased reopening of the economy. And many of you will have seen some of the work that the chambers are doing around that whole phase. Now, I'm one of the big eternal optimists of business. We will recover. It's not a question of if, but we will, as a whole, recover. Not every business, but we will come out of this stronger eventually. I took that view after the financial crisis, which I fully appreciate is a bit of a warm-up act to what we're seeing today, but I think we really can do well coming out of this. So I'm very focused at the moment on how we rebuild. How do we build in resilience? You know, I think I've been pleased by the innovation of the government schemes, but as we start to come out of those, what are we really going to do? And I know the chambers are working hugely on the resilience point, and I would urge everyone focus so much on that. But then we look even further to the renew phase, which is all around prosperity and growth. And I'm excited by growth and where growth will come from. And as challenging it is today, I would urge everyone to at least spend a few minutes each day thinking about the growth opportunities. And it's fantastic to hear Katherine talk about the Western Gateway and what that can really bring and the potential that can bring to the Southwest, because I think that's going to be even more important now we've had the challenges of COVID-19, which will continue. But it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the questions. And I think now I'll hand back to you and then to Adam.
Ruby, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. So I'm also delighted to have with us today Dr. Adam Marshall, who's the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. I'd really like to pay tribute to you, Adam, for the fantastic work that you've done over the last 2 or 3 months, particularly with regards to the COVID pandemic. I know that you are working tirelessly on behalf of business to represent our interests and really to get the very best engagement with government. And you've been working very closely with our colleagues here, Matt Griffiths in particular, our policy director, to make some real impact and to make a real difference for many of our members. So Adam, thank you very much, and over to you.
Richard, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the positive feedback for the work of the combined BCC Chamber Network team. I think for those on the call, the 53 chambers of commerce across the United Kingdom and our 60 British chambers in markets all across the world have really come together over the past 3 months. And we've been able to take ground level feedback literally from every part of the country and from our trading partners around the world to ensure that the policy response that we've seen to the pandemic and to some of the economic issues facing our business communities has been stronger and better informed. So a huge thanks to all member companies of Business West and other business organizations in the region, and so other chambers across the Southwest as well, for all of your continued input and engagement with us as we try to make the UK a place where we can restart, rebuild, and renew our businesses. We sort of began the pandemic by moving into emergency mode, thinking, what is it that we need to do right now to help our business communities get through what is undoubtedly one of the most difficult periods that any of us have faced? And I'm proud to say that the loan programs that came out for businesses, the grant programs and grant schemes that we've seen, and the furlough income support scheme as well, all bear the fingerprints and the hallmarks of the work of the Chamber of Commerce network. I spent many of my weekends in the earliest part of the crisis trying to make sure that the CBILS scheme actually worked and that businesses could get quick access to working capital when many were facing such a tight cash crunch. We were instrumental as well in helping to get the bounce back loan scheme secured for our smallest and micro businesses too. And on grants, the work done by Matt Griffiths together with our team was absolutely crucial in making sure that more businesses could get access to them, and that we were able to work in partnership with our colleagues in local authorities across the country to speed up the delivery of those grants to affected businesses too. So some real concrete evidence of our work together, I think. On furlough, we've been engaged over the past couple of weeks in very intensive conversations with the Treasury about how to make it a bit more flexible for our business community so that businesses can start bringing people back part-time, perhaps, and that any additional contribution that's required from employers as we start to transition away from sort of the hibernation phase that furlough enabled is sensitive and helps businesses get back on their feet, because we know that many companies could be facing waves of cash crunches into the future, and we need that support to be there, to be flexible and to be sensitive for the medium to long term. With the Southwest in particular, we're alive to the particular difficulties faced in the hospitality, tourism and leisure industries, which we know remain extremely acute. And we'll be looking for further support in those areas as well over the weeks and months ahead. We've also been engaging too on policies for reopening and for the recovery. And Ruby mentioned some of the thought leadership work that we're trying to do as a national network to get out there and say, here's what business needs for the future. Some of those things include clear guidance. We need to make sure, and my team is involved literally every day in trying to make sure that the guidance for businesses on reopening and being COVID safe is clear, it's actionable, it's proportionate, and is something that small firms can use, not just large ones who have the infrastructure needed to make it happen. And we've also been working extensively on the testing agenda as well, because we know one of the biggest things that needs to happen is that businesses need to have confidence, consumers need to have confidence, and the public needs to have confidence to get back out there and get the economy working. So we know that testing needs to be a key component of that too, both in the workplace and more broadly in the community. So just to finish off, Richard, I just wanted to bring one story to colleagues' attention. Some of you may have helped us over past weeks putting together what we call the Coronavirus Business Impacts Tracker, a survey of chamber members all across the UK about what was going on in their businesses, right now. That data then enabled us to feed into government what was happening in real time. Just to let you know, colleagues, for those of you who have been involved, I had a note from one of the top people in the Bank of England this morning saying how important that survey has been to their response. We've had a feedback from government departments across Whitehall as well, saying if it weren't for this information, we couldn't have iterated and designed policies that are there to help businesses. So everything that you do in talking to Business West, in talking to your local chamber, it all feeds up into a great national effort. And all of us at the British Chambers of Commerce will be continuing that effort over the weeks and months ahead in partnership with you all. So I look forward to joining in the question and answer session. Richard, thank you so much for the invitation to be with you today.
It's a pleasure, Adam. Thank you very much for that detailed insight and an update for us. That's really appreciated. Thank you. Well, there's a lot of questions coming into the chat box. I'm going to start off actually with one that came in before today's meeting, and it's really, I think, directed to both Katherine and Ruby. You might want to come in on this as well. And it's from James Gore of Copper Consultancy, and James has asked a question actually with regards to the current crisis and how it impacts the Western Gateway's ambitions to be a global gateway. What do we see as the long-term impacts in terms of both international travel and trade? And Katherine, I think you touched on that anyway in your earlier presentation, but I wonder whether perhaps Katherine and Ruby, you might like to just add some further insights.
Well, if you'll appreciate, I don't know if you know, but I come from a communications and marketing background, and for me, you need to take the stage. And I wish us to take the stage and be ambitious, and that's the only way we are going to compete as an area on the internationally. We got to start carefully though, and I have high ambitions, but this is something that Western Gateway cannot do alone. We are actually relatively small in terms of resources. I need my partners of the Gateway to help with that. And James is absolutely right. We need to be seen as a global initiative. I was talking a few months ago to somebody from one of our embassies in overseas, and they said it is very helpful when they're talking to overseas investors to be able to explain, well, to have a kind of umbrella brand. It certainly worked with Northern Powerhouse and Midlands Engine, and of course London doesn't need any further PR. So let's just get going.
Thank you very much.
If I just add to that, so one of my other roles is I chair the AOA, which represents the CEOs of all the UK airports, and also has many corporate members too. And clearly, since this crisis began, we've watched UK airports at probably 3% demand. And if you think about airports and you think about their operating costs, without passengers, without their retail outlets being used, these are not viable organisations within the next year if this continues. So we've been very clear. Our Chief Executive, Karen Dee's been in the media pretty much every day, focused on recovery. We are deeply involved with DFT in the Restart and Recovery Group. We're currently working with the implementation team on quarantining. We were not engaged with on quarantining at all as aviation, which I find extraordinary. And we have said that we do not believe that this is the right way to go. We've seen the exemption list of 40 last week, and we are unclear as to why this has come in. And we're looking for a very clear process for us to begin to exit that. Many of you will have heard of the air bridges that are being suggested already. But from a global travel and trade perspective, Britain must be open. Its airports must be open. Its airlines must fly. We're an island, and I find it extraordinary that we currently are in this situation. I fully respect the science that sits behind what has happened with COVID-19, and I can fully understand that there may well have been a need at some stage to close our borders, but we are really surprised about the timing of today. Now, clearly what we have to do, though, is agree international health standards, which are currently being worked up, not just by us, but by IATA, you've got the airlines, the airports, everyone's involved in that. And those are going to be ready pretty imminently, as long as they're approved by the UK government. But whether we talk about the levelling up agenda, regional connectivity, global connectivity, exports, trade, every single part of what so many businesses do is impacted by what is happening with aviation. And many of you may have seen today, there's been a new group set up by 40 MPs called the Future of Aviation. And I think that group has come together with a number of hotel groups, with a number of tourist groups to say, look, we need to change this. So we're urging the UK government to do that. I'm very happy. If anyone's got any detailed questions on airports and aviation, please let me know. But we have to open up for business.
Thank you very much, both of you. And we have Dave Lees, Chief Exec of Bristol Airport, on the line. So we just need to make sure that we've got that connection very well placed, and we know that we need to work very closely with the airport and the transport providers more widely in the city region, to ensure that absolutely we build that confidence and we make the case to take the right measures and at the right time. So thank you very much. We have 2 or 3 questions that relate to education, how that fits in more widely into the Western Gateway. So Nicholas Capstick has asked, as the CEO of one of the largest multi-academy trusts, how education might form a part of the Western Gateway plans, Catherine. I've also had a question in from Rich Young, who is the CEO of Smarter Knowledge and Exchange Limited, about actually how the universities and businesses form partnerships to work together. I wonder, Catherine, if you might just think about starting to answer that in. And again, I might, Ruby, I'll ask you to just come in afterwards, if that's okay. Catherine,
yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is don't forget your local existing networks and partnerships, and things like WECA already have a role to play on education. So by no means I want to tread on anyone's toes. That's been something I've endeavoured to explain whilst we've been working on this together. But I omitted to say, and apologise for this, that as part of the government's recommendations, one decision we did make was that we would ask for a university representative on our partnership board. So the universities will have to discuss that, how they pinpoint one person to do that. So that's one other thing. Of course, you don't have investment by businesses if you don't have the skills right. And we were going to have to be developing new skills in terms of the digital economy, some of the greener energy projects, etc. Nuclear already happening, but there's so many different opportunities. So absolutely key for me to work with the education sector, but that's not been an immediate priority because we're obviously just getting our structures going and looking at, I think somebody mentioned earlier, sort of shovel-ready projects. What can we get on with? What can we fight for when we are dealing with the immediate aftermath of this economic crisis that we're facing? So my door is open, but please don't forget your existing networks and partnerships you already have. and I'm always open to some ideas, and maybe the Chamber of Commerce can help with pooling some of that initiative.
Thank you very much. Ruby, I don't know if you want to build particularly on the partnerships between universities and business.
I think the more that can be done on business partnerships with, and I'll take it all the way from schools all the way through to university, I think are really positive. We've got reforms coming in through the Department of Education on T-levels. Currently, we have review of the apprenticeship levy. The government is giving a huge focus on apprenticeships, I think, going forwards. And I think that the more business can team up with schools, FE colleges, and also universities, the better, because I think these partnerships are going to become more and more critical as we look at the future of jobs.
Yeah, thank you very much. And actually, I know I have Tim Bowles on the line. And Tim, there's a question from Rich Harris, who's the Vice Principal of the City of Bristol College, who again is just thinking about how we come out of the downturn in terms of investing in apprenticeships and the skills agenda. I know that's at the heart of much of your work, and Katherine alluded to that. So Tim, I wonder if you might just provide a little bit of insight in terms of how the FE agenda is being brought forwards.
Richard, thank you very much, and hello everybody. Great to see so many of you here again. On the FE side, yes, we see colleges as critical to part of the economic recovery for the region. We already have a very, very active and effective group where we have the principals of all of our FE colleges in the region, and we've been meeting for a long time. And we've started to get people working collectively to address the collective needs of businesses in our region, to make sure that the investment we, through the adult education budget at WECA, provide is focused on what the needs of the region are. So Katherine touched earlier on about national industrial strategy. We have our own local industrial strategy, which allows us to hone in on what businesses like Airbus need, and other businesses, I'm sure, who are represented here today. So very much focused on that. City of Bristol we see as really key in that. That's why we've invited the new principal to be part of the Economic Recovery Task Force for the West of England. One of the really key things I think in terms of FE is going to be their ability to be able to react quite quickly as the needs of employers change. So as we move into these different stages, there are likely to be retraining opportunities, likely for needs for people not necessarily to going through whole lengthy several year courses, but that ability for us to be able to be flexible as a region, to be able to react to the changing needs of business. The other couple of things I'd like to put in there, please, as well, is we touched earlier, Katherine and others have, about R&D. And I see there was a mention in the chat about Institutes of Technology. So we're working really hard to try to support in all of our key sectors the call to government about continuing to invest in research and development. So in Katherine's area and others in the aviation and high value engineering, we've got the regional DETI project running on the back of the Brunel Challenge. We've got an Institute of Technology now established in the region. So we're doing an awful lot in terms of our groundwork that we've got in place, but now really, really lobbying and pushing government. Now is the time to invest in the future in terms of technology and how we move things forward. Happy to pick any other specific bits up.
Richard. Yeah, Tim, thank you ever so much for that. And I think that plays to two or three of the questions that come in. I know, Katherine, you've got to leave us at 12:30 in a couple of minutes. There's a couple of questions actually that I'd like to also bring Marvin Rees, Mayor Rees, in, if you don't mind, Marvin, and they relate to questions about how we build sort of social inclusion, how we think about building a circular economy, and actually looking at some of the qualitative arrangements around our forthcoming economic strategy. And I know the work that Marvin's leading in the city plays to that. But Katherine, perhaps you might just give some thoughts to how you'll be thinking about that lens, and then Marvin, if that's okay, you might want to come in as well.
Yeah, I mean, others are far more expert on this than I, but I think the community cohesion work that's done in many parts of our area is absolutely one of our strengths. And I know there's some real challenges and some real areas of deprivation throughout the whole region and area. And it's certainly, if, as a business person, we wish to play our part in helping with that as best we can in light of the current economic challenges we've got. Certainly, this is something that has been discussed but only very sort of lightly so far within the Western Gateway. So again, open to ideas, but I think our bow may be to more our sort of council leadership, political leadership on that.
Excellent. Well, Catherine, I know you're going to dial off now, so thank you so much for joining us today. There's clearly a lot of interest from our members and people on the call to work with you, so we'll help to follow that up afterwards. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Marvin, I've got to go and do a call with Toulouse, so
yeah, yeah. Marvin, maybe I know you've got a call as well, but perhaps just a very quick reflection as well, Marvin.
Yeah, sure. Rich, we've been working really hard to really emphasise the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals that James has mentioned at the outset as well. I think it's not something you necessarily plan to do, but it's one of those opportunities that grows on you and just realise how significant they are for cities around the world are talking about in terms of the SDGs. And if we are talking about them, that includes inclusion, issues of equality, sustainability, biodiversity, political stability, gender equality, then it automatically begins to link us into that global conversation that's going on in Helsinki, New York, and Sao Paulo and so forth. So in terms of being a gateway that Catherine talks about, that's really important. And I'd say just about inclusion in general, it's really important that, and I don't think anyone does anymore, that we don't see this as a nice social outcome that we tack on to the back end of the serious job of growing the economy. Social stability, John Savage, I love his quote, riots are not good for inward investment, right? Social stability, making full use of our talent pool, not leaving millions of pounds worth of talent on the shelf undeveloped every year simply because of the circumstances into which that talent was born is not viable in a globally competitive market. And also one of the things that we talked about in Bristol is our global connectivity. We need to be doing business with fast growing economies around the world, be they in East Africa, West Africa, across Asia. A Nigerian said to me once, if you want to do business in Lagos, you need a Nigerian with you. We have Nigerians. So in terms of those economic, those social, those family connections that we have at our disposal to link us into that global market, I think it's massively important. In terms of the means to make it happen and make it real, my biggest appeal, and I did just put it in the chat in response to something that Liam said earlier on, is we need certainty, as much certainty as we can get from government. We have turmoil now, right? We can't control the turmoil with COVID, but what we can do is try to minimize the number of surprises we get. Every day I'm surprised by government announcements. If we can get some much more certainty over which major infrastructure projects they're going to be backing over the years ahead, we can begin to line up our local supply chains, our skills supply chains. We can begin to speak about economic hope to those communities that are fearful, because we can say, hey, look, there's a £200 million redevelopment of Temple Mead Station coming along. We're going to need floor layers, window fitters, planners, delivery drivers, and and so forth. So we just need to minimise the amount of surprise we're getting from national government, and need to be much more ambitious and proactive, and put their cards on the table about how they're going to stimulate the economy.
Excellent, Marvin. Thank you very much for that, and obviously we will continue to remain connected and working closely with you and partners right across the network. Yeah, no, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much about that. So can I just move on to a couple of, I suppose, slightly technical questions, actually, and Adam, if you wouldn't mind perhaps coming in on these points, actually. So we had a question in the chat box around the job retention scheme and concerns about changes that might come into force at the end of July, particularly in terms of people who have not been on the scheme not being excluded from it from August onwards. And the case in point is that somebody's seeing some decline in revenues, and it's clearly a concern. And we had a question in from a colleague earlier on, was just talking a little bit more about the ethics of the scheme in the context of, you know, how is it being policed? How are HMRC going to deal with people who've perhaps not claimed appropriately or correctly? And I wouldn't mind perhaps your insights just in terms of the work you're doing with government to reflect on where we go next with the job retention scheme, Adam.
Richard, thank you very much. Just before I come on to that, I want to agree with one thing that Marvin just said, which is so hugely important, which is certainty and a clear view on future infrastructure projects. We'll be lobbying the government extensively not to pull back on infrastructure commitments over the months and years ahead. It was a mistake that's been made many times before in UK history, and it's been to the detriment of our business communities and to our productivity. So all of the benefits that Marvin says about being able to do more in communities depend on that infrastructure going ahead, but so too does so much for business. So we will be focusing on that too. On the JRS, there are some very serious technical issues which we've been trying to help the government work through here. They've accepted our case, which is that as much flexibility as possible is needed for employers to recognize their individual cash position, the circumstances they find themselves in, the timing that they're affected by. But HMRC's systems, which have worked so well with a simple system, may not actually be able to cope with too many different variables. So we've been trying to see how much flexibility we can get into the system. We've also been trying to explain to ministers that a blanket exclusion of new people coming into the furlough scheme from the 1st of August could be counterproductive, because I'm hugely sympathetic with the individual in the chat who raised the point that so many businesses have held off furloughing, trying to see where their future revenue streams are going to come from, trying to help as many of their existing customers as they currently could. For them then not to have access to it because the principal concern is fraud by a small minority who want to furlough their people and bring them back part-time is a real concern for us. So we've been trying to push the Treasury on that particular point. I think we'll get more clarity one way or the other over the next 24 to 48 hours. Or possibly early next week, but it's still very much in play. In terms of the ethics of the scheme, one thing that I think we all have to do in the business community is remind anyone who says anything about the scheme that this is, of course, all taxpayers' money. We are all ultimately paying for this. It is not the government, some obscure thing over there, that is paying people's wages. It is all of us. And we will have to deal with the financial consequences of that at some point in time. So on behalf of all of the really good businesses and chambers of commerce around the country who are using the scheme because they have no other alternative, I would be very much in favor of seeing enforcement, and very strict enforcement, against those who are taking advantage of it, or any business or any unscrupulous operator that's doing this to try to make a quick buck. If the rule states that someone who is on furlough cannot be working, which they currently do, if a business is found to violate that, it should face the consequences of that. Because I think all of the businesses who are here today who found that they've had to have recourse to the scheme have done so for the best of intentions, and their needs should be protected, not those very small minority of those who are doing things the wrong way.
Adam, thank you very much, and I think you're absolutely right, and we would endorse particularly that latter point. Thank you. I've had a question through before the session actually, which talks about the return to work. It was from Mark Bouch, the Managing Director of Leading Change, and actually he's asking about the advice we can give to those businesses who are struggling to balance the risks and perceptions about risks in returning to the workplace. And I know it's an issue, Adam, that you'll have been looking at, but I know equally we've been working with partners across the region, and I've got Nigel Costley, who's the Regional Secretary for the TUC on the line, and I'd like to bring in Nigel, if you don't mind, just to talk about the work that we're doing across the city to ensure that we provide the right support for businesses in helping them to return to work. And then Adam, perhaps you can come in as well. Nigel, you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry, well, thank you very much, Richard. Yes, and we're pleased to work with the initiative overwhelmingly employers are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to get their risk assessments in place to bring people back safely. And a lot of this is about confidence and assuring both workers, but their families as well, that it will be safe. And there will be some challenges along the way. And I think unions want to be part of that constructive process of bringing people back safely. But there would need to be a degree of transparency. We're seeing in schools a lot of staff and parents are very nervous about the reopening of schools. And I think there was a sense that things were in the wrong order. We need to win the confidence of people before they can come back. And big issues around public transport. It's been great, some of the work that First Group has been doing to make sure that the buses are safe. But we're seeing a lot of abuse coming on bus drivers, just as we are in shop workers who are trying to manage social distancing, trying to manage driving with half-empty buses while people are desperate to get to work. So these tensions are going to continue. Happy to work with employers. Our health and safety reps have, I think, really stepping up to the mark to work with managers to make sure it's safe when people come back.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Nigel. Appreciate that. And Adam?
Yes, I completely agree with Nigel about the confidence point, and that confidence goes for both employers and employees, and of course for customers and suppliers of those businesses as well. Everyone needs that confidence. I'd agree too on the interdependencies, as we call them, so public transport, childcare, schools, local services. Getting people back into the workplace on a consistent basis really depends on all of those other aspects of the economy and society functioning effectively. And I think there's a strong feeling amongst our business communities that some of the strategies here have been very siloed. You know, someone's thinking about transport over here, someone's thinking about schools over here, someone's thinking about reopening business over here, and they've got to all come together. And I know that those are better handled at the local level, whether that be the individual local authority or a city region level, than they are in Whitehall, where unfortunately some of the departments have been rather far apart over the last couple of months. One other point I'd add to this, though, in terms of reopening and confidence, is about the role of regulators. So both for local authorities and for the health and safety executive, we in business need you to do everything in your power to help us get things right. If this turns into a box ticking exercise where someone comes in with a clipboard and a copy of the guidance into a business and says, I'm going to now check what you've done, I think we will have to take a step backward in terms of that confidence. If, on the other hand, regulators are helping particularly small and medium-sized businesses to check what they've done in order to bring people back safely and to make any adjustments that might be required, I think we can build more strongly on the foundation that we've laid already to date.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm just conscious that with only a few minutes to go, it's time to start thinking about wrapping up. We've had a very detailed set of questions and a really good set of responses. What I would like to do actually is to make sure that our team capture all the questions that haven't been answered. There's a lot in the chat, and we'll make sure that we follow up with all of those properly. And Stuart Elford, I know you didn't manage to raise a question of Catherine. If you let us have that, that will be super. Thank you. We'll make sure that question goes to Catherine. And I think, Ruby, if you wouldn't mind just giving your final reflections. Actually, you've heard a lot about the business in our part of the region and the economy and some of the key stakeholders. I welcome your final reflections, and then I'll just bring the meeting to a close. Thank you.
You know, look, it's funny. It was fantastic to hear about the Western Gateway, and also fantastic to hear about, I've been watching the chat as it's come in as well, with some of the questions and comments. I think I was very struck by Marvin's comments around what we need to do with infrastructure projects. When I wrote to the Prime Minister, we talked about an expansionary fiscal policy where we really focus on infrastructure going forward, that there are no delays to it, and that we really do get on with it. I certainly know through my whole career just how much infrastructure has helped, really helped build the economy. And if ever there was a time to build the economy, it was now. And then secondly, I'm also struck by what Adam just said about regulators. You know, we need regulatory alleviation as we come out of this. What we don't want is more regulation. The idea, particularly as we leave the European union transition rules is that we categorically must have less regulation in the UK so business can thrive. And so I think a big focus from us on that, and from all businesses, please talk to anyone you know connected with business about those two particular points. The government has to hear us as business on a number of points: the return to work, how we return, the health standards, the expansion of infrastructure projects to help business, the extension of schemes to help taper off so that companies don't face a cliff edge. And that as we come out of it, regulatory alleviation is going to be really key to growth.
Ruby, thank you very much. I think that really nicely summarises all that we've heard today, and it's so important that we continue to make sure that we're really clear on where we need to lobby government around regulations, around infrastructure investment, and so on and so forth. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank everybody who's come in, particularly supporting us with regards to answering the Q&A. Thank you very much to all of you. Ruby and Adam, thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back to the region in the coming months. And for everybody who's joined us, thank you for taking the time to listen. We'll share with you the content and the questions as a follow-up. And we look forward to seeing everybody in a couple of weeks' time. And details from the events team will be forthcoming with our next events. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Thank you.